It was a Tuesday, early evening. An offshore support vessel, the Braveheart, left a supply base to head for an offshore gas production platform to transfer fuel and equipment. The vessel and the platform had agreed a time of arrival and the details of the delivery. The weather was fine, but a strengthening wind and increasingly rough seas were forecast.
On the other side of the world, in a pigging location, a team of specialist contractors were preparing to pig a pipeline which hasn't been cleaned for a few years. They'd been given their instructions. It was just another routine pigging job, work they'd carried out successfully on many similar pipelines across the region. Their objective was to get the job done safely and effectively. They started work with clearly defined goals, and they knew exactly what to expect. The toolbox talk focused on the personal protective equipment they'd be using. This was just another pigging job, and they'd done hundreds of them.
Back at sea, the Braveheart began to experience a technical issue with one of her main propellers. The chief engineer remembered that this fault had happened before and instructed his engineers to carry out repairs. A spare part they needed wasn't on board, so a temporary repair was made. With the job successfully completed and the propeller pitch control system tested, the vessel continued her journey.
The work started well. The pig made its way through the pipe smoothly. But then, just as it reached its receiver, it stopped moving. The team investigated and decided to try to free the pig themselves. Even though there were no detailed instructions on what actions to take if a pig got stuck, the team were so confident they knew what to do that they just got on with it.
The Braveheart sailed on, but the chief engineer knew that if the fault returned, the vessel would have difficulty maintaining her position close to the platform during the transfer of fuel and equipment. He approached the captain and shared his concerns, pointing out that the operations manual states that the vessel should not undertake critical operations unless all systems are in good working order. The captain replied that the propeller problem had been repaired and tested. Knowing that the platform was running low on supplies, he opted to stick to the plan and make the delivery.
Based on his own previous experience, the team's supervisor eventually decided to deploy a method that he'd used successfully in the past, to request that a second pig be sent down the line, to see if this would dislodge the first pig.
The Braveheart arrived in the field and made contact with the platform. During completion of the 500-meter zone checklist, they were informed that the only crane available was located on the upwind side of the platform. And, as forecast, the weather was getting worse, but it was still just within the limits stated in the Manual of Permitted Operations. And the repaired propeller was working well. The Braveheart's watch officer and the team on the platform had worked in bad weather many times before. It was a routine activity. When the 500-meter entry procedures were completed, the platform approved Braveheart's entry into its safety zone.
The stuck pig didn't move. Darkness was beginning to fall, but the team remained confident that they could get the job done. So the supervisor decided to ask for the pressure in the line to be increased. It meant that they had to stay and monitor the operation late into the night. By early morning, nothing had changed, so they decided to close the pig receiver valve, vent the line, and open the receiver door to investigate further.
As the Braveheart approached the platform, the watch officer noticed wind gusts well in excess of what was allowed in the Manual of Permitted Operations. And as he was trying to decide whether the captain should be called to assess the situation, the port main propeller pitch suddenly moved to full ahead. The vessel moved sharply ahead and swung towards the platform. A strong gust of wind added to its momentum, and the Braveheart smashed into one of the platform's legs. The impact resulted in structural damage to both the platform and the vessel. A crew member was seriously injured and airlifted ashore for treatment. The platform shut in production, and non-essential staff were evacuated while the extent of the damage was investigated.
As soon as the team received confirmation that the pressure on both sides had been vented, they opened the receiver door to find that the stuck pig was close enough to be pulled out with a tool. But as they started pulling, a sudden release of residual pressure shot the pig out of the receiver with great force, killing one person and narrowly missing others working beside him.
The Braveheart had been checked by a third-party inspector before she'd set out. He'd gone through a full operational safety assessment and found that the vessel was in order. The crew in the company that operated Braveheart was competent and experienced, and their fleet of offshore support vessels had no history of major incidents. However, the main propeller fault had not been investigated fully, and the root cause was not established. When it failed again, the risk profile of the job completely changed.
The procedures for the pigging work were based on the assumption that the work would go according to plan. They did not highlight the checks and steps that were required if problems arose during the work. But the team had freed stuck pigs in the past and were confident that they could do so again. What they didn't know was that one of the valves in the pig receiver installation had been replaced. The new valve had a slightly smaller diameter than the original, which is why the pig had got stuck. When the change was made, no one thought that it would impact pipeline operations, which meant that the management of change process was not used to identify and mitigate risks. That seemingly insignificant change turned out to not only be important, it ultimately contributed to a tragedy.
The crew of the Braveheart and the team carrying out the pigging did what many of us would have done in their place. They looked for ways to manage the problems that appeared and still get the job done. Both teams were experienced. They dealt with similar situations many times before and were confident that they could do so again. So how did experienced and skilled people suddenly find themselves in life-threatening situations? They were too optimistic about the possible dangers and their ability to overcome them.
We all do it. People are naturally optimistic. It's how we've evolved. It helps us do more, go further, and discover new things. The way our brains work means people tend to overestimate our ability to achieve success and underestimate the chances of failure. This unrealistic optimism means that when situations change, we just start working around the problem. It becomes normal. And because most of the time nothing bad happens, we also become confident that it will never happen. Not this time, not to us, but it can. On the ground, the job scope had changed, but the team kept going. Insufficient time was spent on identifying potential risks, and when the scope changed, they didn't take time to stand back and work out if there were any new risks, because they'd worked around problems before and were optimistic that they could do so again.
Even when things change, we continue to focus on completing the job. We want to get it done, on time and as planned. However, we can quickly become used to the change and accept more risks. This is called risk normalization. It happens in all industries, from medicine to banking, and it's when accidents can happen. When a job scope changes, we need to take time. Take a step back and reassess the risks. Reevaluate if we should involve others rather than just press on.
Even a small change to a plan, a procedure, or a technical detail can lead to very real risks to people and the environment. And the barriers designed to protect us from these risks can gradually weaken over time. So to stay safe, we have to ensure that our barriers remain strong and healthy at all times. If you are not completely sure, stop until you are.
When something changes, be uneasy. Question every change. Anticipate the bad outcomes and plan how to avoid them. Take time to understand the new situation. Look at all the facts. What do you know? And what are you assuming you know? And if that means you have to delay the job or change the plan, do it. That's better than putting yourself or your colleagues at risk.
I keep my barrier strong when things change.